So Marsha, it's been just an amazing day. I thank you so much for being here with us. We've recognized you today as our very first African American to graduate from the College of Nursing, and we're just so proud of you and all of your accomplishments. So congratulations again, and thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. As I mentioned earlier, I could not really imagine coming back and having such a warm welcome and to be able to tell my story about being here at the University of Kentucky. So thank you.
So I'm going to take us back, way back to 1972 when you were being penned and graduating. Let's talk a little bit more about your experience as being the first African American in our College of Nursing. Tell me a little bit about that experience and how it has shaped you as a nurse leader.
First of all, I think that at the time, of course, I really couldn't appreciate the really robust education that I was getting at the University of Kentucky, and especially in the College of Nursing. That really propelled me into being a lot more self-confident, having a sense of self-efficacy, and just overall being a better nurse than I thought I was. But I didn't realize it at the time. You know, like when you're in it, you don't necessarily know what it is that you are being exposed to or how you're going to come out on the other end. And as I really got into the field of nursing, I realized that I had gained a whole lot more from my nursing education than I would have ever have thought. And as a result, I think that laid the foundation for me to really be able to explore different specialties, nursing specialties. And in a way, the one question that I was always asking when I was at the unit level was, why are people who are not down here on the floor making decisions about those of us who are down here on the floor? Where is this protocol coming from? Where is this policy coming from? And at first I thought I wanted to pursue a clinical pathway. But once I moved into a leadership role, or I should say management role initially, and I began to be exposed to the decision making, I realized that was what I wanted to be part of. I needed to see the big picture. And so that's what led me into leadership. And of course, I joined the Navy. And then when you join the Navy Nurse Corps. You're going to be a nurse, but the expectation is that you're also going to be a leader. Mm-hmm. And that's from day one. So there's an expectation that you are able to integrate the two.
So throughout the day, you've shared many stories, and
Yes.
we thank you for that. And one that I keep going back to is that you really never thought of yourself as a first because of the way that you were raised, and you talked about your roots right here in Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit more about that, and also, if you would, about how Dr. Juanita Flemming impacted your life here as the first African American student.
Right. Oftentimes people ask me if I knew that I was the first African American student here at the College of Nursing. And I have to admit that no, I did not know that I was the first. It didn't even dawn on me that I was the first African American student. And I think one of the reasons that it didn't occur to me was because my father was in the Army, and I was very much used to being in an environment that where I was maybe the only African American or one of a few. And so coming to the University of Kentucky College of Nursing, when I stepped in to, I think we had something like 60 students in our class, or maybe I'm overestimating, it may have been half that, I can't remember. But when I stepped in and I looked around, it didn't even dawn on me as strange. As a matter of fact, it probably would have been more strange if I had seen more African American women in the class, which I know that sounds really odd, but that was just the environment that I was in. I mean, when you looked at the bigger campus at University of Kentucky, you did not see many black students walking around, nothing like what I have seen visiting these couple of days. So the whole notion of me being the first African-American student to graduate from the College of Nursing, it never, ever occurred to me. The way that I found out was several years later, and I had applied to graduate school. And the graduate school that I had applied for asked for letters of recommendation from your undergraduate college. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to, find somebody who would actually vouch for me? Because, I don't know if I had the best of reputations here at the College of Nursing. So I did write and ask for a letter of recommendation, and Dr. Juanita Flemming was the one who actually responded, although she was at the graduate level. But I think that she was watching my comings and goings and was kind of behind the scene as far as she knew what I didn't know. And so when she wrote the letter, the very first line in the letter stated, Marsha, our first African-American graduate from the College of Nursing. And then she went on to talk about, how well suited I would be for the graduate program. I really only remember those first few lines of that letter because when I read it, I was just taken back. I really was taken back. And I have to admit, I cried. And the reason that I did cry was because then some things began to really, come together. It's kind of like connecting the dots. And it wasn't like the curriculum was any harder for me than it was for any of my classmates. It was a very hard curriculum. And I don't necessarily think the faculty were as caring and nurturing then as they are now. But I really think that I was also up against institutionalized racism and unconscious biases that were not just part of the College of Nursing, but the College of Nursing was embedded in the University of Kentucky. And the University of Kentucky had its own history of institutionalized racism and unconscious biases. So why would the College of Nursing be any different? Right. They didn't know what they didn't know. And so I think that once I sat down and I was able to kind of unpack what I had newly learned and make meaning of my experience a little bit differently, I thought, okay, now this makes sense or that makes sense or whatever event. As I'm now recalling different events and reshaping the narrative that I had built around it. And it wasn't as much, granted, I still held myself responsible, but I didn't take all of the responsibility for being what I thought was not too good of a student.
Right.
Because I had really graduated thinking, oh, Marsha, you probably are not going to make a very good nurse.
Well, you've got to share the story about how you really first met Dr. Flemming, because if I recall, she was the first African-American faculty member and the only for many, many years.
Yes. Oh, it's a funny story, and I have to even laugh at myself now. And it just goes to show how her patience and her own presence probably spoke to the moment. They were very much into writing care plans when I came to the College of Nursing, and I had an elderly African-American woman who did not have any teeth, and she was not eating the hospital food. And so when I interviewed her and asked why she wasn't eating the food, she said, well, I don't like it, which that made perfect sense to me. And so I said, well, what would you eat? What would you like to eat? And she says, well, you can just bring me some pot liquor and some cornbread and from home, and I'll be fine. So I said, well, that makes sense to me. So I put that in my care plan, allow family members to bring her some pot liquor, which is the broth boiled off of collard greens or mustard greens. And so I said, that has all the nutrition anyway, so she would probably be getting more nutrients. I put that in my care plan. I get my care plan back. There is so much red on this care plan that it looks like it's bleeding, like it's hemorrhaging. And I am just like amazed that someone could put this much criticism on a care plan. But I think that what really stuck out at me the most was the criticism around that particular intervention that I was recommending. Well, I was just livid. Now, can you imagine?
Yes.
A nursing student, I think I was 21 years old.
Probably a sophomore or junior?
I was a junior. I think I was a
Okay.
junior. And I'm sitting and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to do? So I decided I was going to go and have a conversation with Dr. Juanita Flemming, who was at the graduate level. She wasn't even teaching at the undergraduate level, but because she was a faculty member of color, I thought, well, maybe she'll at least listen to me. So I literally made an appointment, marched into her office, and showed her my care plan and told her how much I disagreed with the instructor. And not only did I disagree with this particular instructor, I had concerns about her even being an instructor at the College of Nursing. Now, can you imagine a student telling the professor that you have concerns about an instructor, right? I had concerns because she only has a master's degree, and as far as I knew, she had absolutely no clinical experience. And so Dr. Flemming, I remember her sitting there and shaking her head and being very patient, asking me some questions. And after that, I felt so relieved. I thought, okay, I've gotten that out of the way. And I made the decision, I will write care plans the way that they want me to write care plans. But the lesson learned was I could write the care plans the way that they wanted me to write them. On the other hand, I knew that in order to deliver good patient care, I would still have to listen to the patient in the future. And so then I had forgotten about that incident because I had made the decision that I was going to write care plans that met the criteria for not getting all the red on the care plan. And so about 10 years, fast forward about 10 years, Dr. Flemming is in Philadelphia. I'm stationed in Philadelphia, and we're both at this conference, and she's a speaker. And I, after she has spoken, I ran up to her because I was so excited to see her, and I introduced myself. I says, Dr. Flemming, my name is Marsha Hughes Rease. I don't know if you remember me. She started laughing. Yeah. She said, Marsha, how could I forget you? And I looked at her, and she was able to verbatim talk to me about that particular incident. And she said, you probably don't think that I did anything. I said, well, to be quite honest with you, no, I didn't. Your listening to me really was beneficial. She says, no, she says, I did. She says, I called a meeting of the faculty, and we had a long conversation about you and your concerns about the care plan. I said, well, thank you. I says, that's good for me to know. I says, I really appreciate that. So there were, I'm sure, faculty members working in the background that I didn't know about that were rooting for me. And they probably were rooting for all other different students as well. But I knew that she was rooting for me.
Well, before we move to more of the work that you're doing currently and kind of some of your thinking with leadership, what is it, if you knew then, back in those days, what you know now in terms of the institutional racism that you reference and the unconscious bias that was actually taking place. What would you tell your younger self back then, way back then?
Yeah. I would tell my younger self to continue to persevere. Because I've oftentimes said that it was good that I didn't know that I was the first African American, because that would have potentially have given me a chance to use that as an excuse.
Okay.
And so I would say to that younger self, Marsha, this is not going to be, this is not the first time that you've experienced racism or unconscious bias, and it certainly is not going to be the last time. So you're going to have to really develop some strategies around resilience, but you're also going to have to think about how you can work to address some of those social justice issues that perhaps you don't have the power or influence to address now. But you're being prepared. You're being prepared for addressing those challenges. And really and truly, that's exactly what happened. Because when I joined the Navy, and I was only going to stay in the Navy for 3 years. I had called my father and told him that, they were having issues around, they were having race riots on carriers, and there was significant discrimination, talking about institutionalized racism. I mean, the Navy was the epitome of it. So I had jumped from the skillet to the frying pan. And I was just, can I handle this? And when I called my father, he said, you're going to be one of the people to change it. And I defied him by saying, I don't intend to be around that long. I'm gonna stay my 3-year obligation, and then I'll be out. Well, my father was right. I would later become part of the Navy's diversity and equity. They just call it the diversity program at that point in time, about mid-career. And I would continue the rest of my career to be a strong advocate, as well as someone who had impact all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy's office in terms of influencing change. And it wasn't just around race, but gender as well.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So, Marsha, you've been seeing the transformation that's been going on at the university and certainly here in the College of Nursing. Is there any wisdom that you can share with us how we can continue to get to a better place with diversity and inclusivity? From your perspective, what would that look like? What would that look like to say, yes, the College of Nursing has arrived?
Dr. Heath, I don't want to disappoint you. I don't know if the College of Nursing or any other institution will ever arrive.
Okay.
And that's not bad. That means that you're going to always be on the journey. And so that whole notion of the destination, I think it should be the vision, the dream, which I see you have. And that vision, that dream is going to change. We oftentimes think that, okay, it's out there, it's tangible, I'm going to be able to reach it. And just as you think that you are that much closer, it changes.
Yes.
Because the environment that we are in is constantly changing. So it's wonderful to have that vision, and the vision can be so. I think you need a vision to be inspirational, to have something that people can look toward and say, this is the reason that we're doing what we're doing. And thanks to you and your passion and your commitment, that vision is firmly planted. I mean, I was reading you all's mission statement for the College of Nursing, and so it's right there in your mission statement. It's right there in your vision statement. And so what the College of Nursing and this is any other organization needs to really be aware of, is whether or not they, the members of the organization, are walking their talk. In other words, are the values on the wall that I just read out there, which are wonderful values, and you walk into other organizations and you see values on the wall, and of course those are your espoused or your aspirational values, but how do you make those come alive? How do you hold people accountable for those values in terms of their behaviors? What are even the behaviors that are expected here at the University of Kentucky College of Nursing? And how do you begin to appreciate how people will need to develop in some cases if they're going to be members of your College of Nursing faculty? Because when they come into the College of Nursing, they may not be where you want them to be in terms of demonstrating those behaviors that reflect the operationalization of those values. However, all of us are capable of growth. And so having that in place where your faculty, the expectation is that they grow, that they are, and they are responsible for living those values.
That's great. Thank you for recognizing that, Marsha. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit. You know, this is a very special year in a lot of ways. Part of that is because of Lyman T. Johnson, a big part of that, with us celebrating the 70th anniversary of him bringing integration to the University of Kentucky. You wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that, right?
You're exactly right.
So it's also a big year in terms of the World Health Organization and the American Nurses Association declaring this is the year of the nurse and midwife. Yes. So all of your contributions and leadership and support with our healthcare organizations for those seeking magnet or pathway of excellence, where would you see our future being for nursing and healthcare delivery and the impact nurses have made and will continue to make? If you could just look into that crystal ball, what do you see happening with our future?
You know, nursing is so positioned to have a powerful impact on healthcare and the delivery of quality care. I mean, year after year after year, nursing is identified as, first of all, the number one most trusted profession. And so there's faith in nurses to do the right thing. And so I think that I'm hoping that nurses will really rise to the occasion, that they will be able to see that they do have the power, that they do have the influence to help healthcare confront a lot of the challenges that it's facing right now. As a matter of fact, the challenges will not be resolved without the support, without the help, without the innovative thinking that nurses can bring to the table. And I think that nurses have to realize that they're going to have to be at the table. You know, we oftentimes think about, the CNO being in the C-suite. Yeah. However, there is a real, and this is what I really like about the magnet recognition program and the pathway to excellence, is because there's an expectation that you have nurses from different levels in the organization participating at the organizational level to make changes in policies, to be part of and engaged in the decision-making process, to really be responsible for and align with the organizational goals. And so it's no longer the CNO's responsibility. It's all of nursing's responsibility. And if we can begin to help especially our new nurses, when they're coming into the hospital, that they learn that you're part of a professional body. You're a professional, and there's certain obligations that you have as a professional, and helping them to appreciate what those are, and to then go out on the unit or go into the clinics or into the community and enact those. I think that it will not just be the year of the nurse and the midwife. It may be the century or the decade, at least, of the nurse and the midwife.
So this is my last question, because we've got to get you to the airport.
Okay.
Tell us, if you were given the opportunity to have lunch with one person, non-nurse, who would that be, and briefly, why?
Yes, and someone asked me that question earlier, and my answer hasn't changed. The person that I am most curious about would be Harriet Tubman. And the reason is because I was very much fascinated and interested in Harriet Tubman before the movie came out. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, my husband and I actually went down to the eastern shore of Maryland, where Harriet was a slave, and then later would actually do a number of her Underground Railroad freedom trips. And so we did a lot of exploration of her lifetime while we were there. And I've just, read a number of stories about her, and I think it was her courage and her real commitment. I mean, she could have easily have fled and could have gone on to Canada and lived her own life, but she had this commitment to bring others along. And she just kept doing it over and over and over again. And I guess the question that the conversation I would want to have is, Harriet, what was it that made you keep going back, that made you put your own life at risk for the lives of others, to become known as the Moses, so to speak, of your people?
It has been so wonderful having you with us. Thank you so much. It's just an honor to say you're ours.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you so much,
I guess we have
Marsha.
this mutual, respect here, because I just thank you for even, venturing into, looking at this as an opportunity to not just look back in terms of the College of Nursing, but more importantly, to look forward in terms of the future of College of Nursing. So thank you.